Um, I've known Mike for a really long time. Mike and Sue, his wife here, have dedicated their entire lives to education in our little community in Tiger Tualatin and Hillsboro School Districts. And they have put a mark on those districts with their amazing skills and foresight and just a great way they look at education. And you'll hear about that from Mike tonight. I've known Mike personally as well as professionally. Mike's been through a lot of things. He was a classroom teacher starting out, as was Sue, and then a counselor, advisor, an assistant principal, a principal at one point named principal of the year, I believe, and then an assistant superintendent, and then a superintendent. And Sue's been a principal as well, and she claims to be retired, but she keeps going back. And Mike has now formed his own consulting company in education. My professional experience with Mike was a little bit humorous from my perspective because some student wanted a pony as a comfort animal in his school. And my office thought that was a good idea at the United States Attorney's Office Civil Rights Division. And so there was quite a discussion in my office over that. Mike, I think, ended up with a plastic or ceramic pony in his office as a decoration for much of his last few years in the office. So Mike has he's a beaver, and so is Sue, but then he did redeem himself by getting his master's degree at University of Oregon, and he has a daughter who is a duck and a son who went to Linfield. So without anything further, I just want to say thank you for coming out tonight, because I promise you Mike will be far more entertaining than the 5 candidates who want to be president on the Republican side tonight. We're missing that debate. Thank you.
All right. What could go wrong with a pony running around the school? Really? I mean, what could possibly go wrong? Anyway, I am pleased to be here, and when Leslie was rattling off my resume, it sounds like I can't hold a job. That's not true. For the last 14 years, I was the superintendent in Hillsboro, and I was one of those people that said a million times, I will never be a superintendent. That is the last job I want. And then sometimes you find a job and sometimes the job finds you. In this case, that's what happened. And I will say it is just the professional high water mark for me. It was during challenging times, but the work was good, and I'm happy to have served in that venue. Any educators or former educators in the room? What did you teach?
I taught gifted and talented education.
Very good. All right. I saw another one maybe. What did you teach?
Public relations for public education.
Oh, good for you.
It probably ran into me when I was at the Oregon School Boards Association.
Probably. Okay. Very good. Well, good. Always happy to have other educators in the room. I did not grow up in a governor's mansion, so but the trailer park next to our house was really nice. So it's a little different experience. Take 1 second and at your table, talk about 2 things for about 2 minutes. Your biggest worry that you have about education, and any questions that you might have that you're hoping to get answered tonight. So just take a minute and talk amongst yourselves, and then I'll ask you to call those out. Biggest worry and any question.
Lack of consistency in charter schools. There seems to be a trend. I might actually consider that homeschooling if I had a child and you were concerned about safety. But how you get equal educational experience. And I think, COVID did get a real toll.
Mental health. My concern for public education is independent. It looks so different than what it used to look. Support is eroding to a point where it's kind of like diminishing return. A lot of people are either homeschooling or private schooling. And that's fine. Everyone has that right. But you gotta maintain public education. That was supposed to be the great equalizer.
Yeah, true.
I was thinking more. And the fact that he's back and back in the west is
Yes.
Let's talk for about 30 more seconds and we'll wrap it up.
It's so efficient with these leaves. You know, when they looked at the funding that went to the adaptive Jewish schools and millions of dollars, and the kids can hardly read it.
Okay, let's hear what you came up with. What are some, let's start with the worries. What are some of the worries that were discussed at your table? Just someone call out. What is, yeah.
Literacy.
Yeah, okay. What else?
Keeping public schools viable and not having to compete with vouchers and private schools.
Yeah.
Therefore, the unaccredited schools and lowering education levels and standards. Teacher retention.
But it's our funding system we have in Oregon.
You got that right. Okay.
Being able to educate all of our children, including children with disabilities like mine.
Okay.
Absenteeism,
Yeah,
Mental health.
high rates.
okay. Someone back there. Someone raise their hand back there. No?
That was my crochet hook, but.
Okay, sorry.
The issue of anti-science and censored books
Oh, yeah. Book banning.
in science.
Oh,
Okay,
I banned.
all right. I am prepared to talk about several of those tonight. The ones I don't know anything about, I'm just gonna pretend like I didn't hear them. So that'll be my strategy. You know, we can bring them up at the end. So we'll and hopefully you won't remember. So we'll see how that goes. So as I was thinking about the comments tonight, one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about, just give you a little history lesson when it comes to education and where we are right now and some of the challenges that we're facing. And you did a good job hitting on a lot of the challenges that are currently in place right now. When I think about the past, the present, and the future of education, when I'm talking about the past, I'm not going to go back that far. I'm going to go back to like 1990. That's the past because things have changed so quickly. And then we're going to go up to about 2020. And then we've had radical changes since then. And then we'll talk about the future as well. So the way I think about it in my own head is what did my kids experience? That's the past. What's happening right now? And what will our grandkids, what will my grandkids? There's none on the horizon yet, but you never know. If there's grandkids, what their future would look like. So when I think about the past, if I think back just 14 years ago when I started as the superintendent in Hillsboro, when it came to school board elections, totally nonpartisan. I could not tell you who was Republican. I could not tell you who was a Democrat. Totally nonpartisan, and people ran for the school board largely because they wanted to make a difference in the community. That was the entire reason they ran for the school board. I mentioned we're talking about the past first, right? That's what that was all about. When you think about the way that schools were viewed as the center of the community, right? If you needed to have an event, we'll hold it at the local elementary schools. If there need to be information disseminated, give a flyer to the elementary school, they'll put it in kids' backpacks, off they'll go, and then the information will get home. If you think about the manner in which educators were treated, or viewed, the perception was much more positive, even in 1992 than it is right now. Teachers were respected. There wasn't, the interactions between students and teachers looked a lot different than they currently do. And that's how it went. To a large degree, parents gave educators the benefit of the doubt. And that was just how it was. And sometimes that was a good thing, and other times it was abused for sure. But that was the tone back then. If you think about how educators approached their work, they were not out seeking community partners in 1990 or 1992. It was more this view of, hey, we've got this, let us do our thing. We'll call you if we need you. We relied on volunteerism. And if you think about volunteerism at the elementary level, you would have all kinds of parents coming in and the classrooms, the room parents, they would take care of a million different things. When they got to middle school, they all disappeared because everyone's afraid of middle school kids. And then when you get to high school, they're what I would refer to as episodic volunteerism. If their kid's on the band, they're all in for the band. If their kid is a softball player, they're going to be in that snack shack every game. But it wasn't for the benefit of the entire school. It was for the benefit of the program that their kids were involved in. If you look at volunteerism now, it's changed in a pretty big way, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. If you think about the manner in the students who were most successful in our schools in the past, they were students that were largely white, they were super compliant, and they understood how the school game was played. That is who was successful in our school system in the throughout the 90s. I think about and of course before that, I think about my best friend growing up. His name was Manuel, and we both came from similar neighborhoods. We had similar incomes. Our family situation was very similar, and it wasn't until years and years and years later where I started to understand that the benefits that I didn't even know I was getting throughout the education system and into adulthood that he was not afforded. Schools worked really well for people like me, compliant, organized. My wife would say differently about organized, but from a school perspective, organized, and it worked really well. The other group of kids that it worked well for is those that were, if they were students of color, they were ready to conform to the white standard. That's how it was in order to be successful in the schools. In the past, we moved quickly from a system that had a lot of electives, and in the 70s, let's try everything. Let's teach them to make that leather belt that they're going to need. Let's send them to the wood shop, all of those things. And then we quickly moved as we went into the 90s that it was college for everybody. You remember that era where it was college or bust? And if some reason a kid wasn't going to take the college route, somehow either as educators we failed them or they just didn't want it bad enough. Right? That was the tone in the 90s. We learned at that time that while high expectations are great, it's great that we're preparing students for college. I don't think anyone would argue with that's a great goal to have as an option for them. But what it also had was a negative impact on so many of our students that wasn't the route that they were going to take. Either they had chosen that's not what they wanted to do, or it just wasn't a viable option for them because of their family circumstances. And so during the 90s, there was this time period where we were unwittingly pushing kids out of the system because they didn't have this sense of belonging that they needed to feel like they were part of the school and like they were part of a system that was supporting them. It was a time that kids were tracked in a pretty consistent way. There were all kinds of different ways of going about it, but kids were tracked by ability level. When I first got the superintendent job, one of the things that I did is I was out and I was visiting various schools, and I went to one of our elementary schools. And this was one of our elementary schools it was the first school in our district to have a dual language program. Now we've got 12 of them in the district, and they're thriving, and there's waiting lists to get into them. They're really working well. Early on, that wasn't necessarily the case. And as a superintendent, I was visiting schools. I go and I'm walking around with the principal, and we were basically tracking kids at that time. We had fancier names for it. We had the emerging group and the grade level group and that kind of thing, but we were tracking kids. As we walked into each classroom, he would tell me, this is, I'm just gonna call it low, medium, and high. It's not what we call them, but just to make it easy to track. This is the low group. We would go into another classroom and say, this is the highest group in second grade. We'd go into another room, this is the medium group. And we did that, we went through a few grade levels. And as we walked into the next classroom, I said, oh, this is the low group. And he said, yeah, how'd you know that? How'd you know that? And I said, because it's a color line, every classroom you take me to. The lowest groups have more students of color, the medium groups are a little bit mixed, high groups are largely white. And I went back to the district office and it was a school that very diverse, a lot of English language learners in that school. And I asked our English language learner director, said, how many English language learners do we have in our school system right now? And the number was 3,351. And I said, based on the information that we have with graduation rates, how many of those kids will not graduate if they continue at the same rate that they're on? I still remember the number was 1,521. 45% of our English language learners were not going to graduate using the systems that we were using at that time. And when I think about 1,521 kids, you can fill an average high school with 1,521 kids. You can fill 2 middle schools. You can fill 4 elementary schools with 1,521 kids. Yet we were not in a hurry to make a change because the systems that we were using and that were being used throughout the state and were being used throughout the nation were super convenient for the adults in the system. And as we looked at that, it was really clear that, that we needed to change some things. In addition to that, at the same time, we were doing away with so many of the electives that we had, so many of the electives that were keeping kids engaged in schools, so many of the electives that were getting them to show up every day. Yeah, they weren't showing up for their social studies class, but they were showing up for welding. They weren't showing up for their English class, but they were showing up for the automotive class. Because it was college for everybody, that's the trend we were on at that time. I remember thinking that when I was a kid, I used to collect bottle caps. So don't judge me because that's a weird collection. I get it. But it was also before video games, right? And so, you know, you were actually outside instead of in front of your TV. And I would collect these bottle caps. And one of my favorite things to had hundreds of them. It was also before the Oregon recycling law, so you'd find them on the ground everywhere. Love to collect them. And one of the things I liked is I love to sort them. I love to sort them into groups. And I would sort them by like, well, let's put all the beer ones together. Let's put all the soda pop ones together. Let's sort them by color. Let's sort them by whatever. And then there was this group that had been like run over by cars and they were all flattened out and they were just beat up. They were kind of the throwaway pile, but I wanted to add to my collection so I wouldn't throw them away. And as I thought about the way I used to collect bottle caps and the way I used to sort them, I was almost ashamed to realize that it wasn't bottle caps that we were sorting anymore, it was kids. And even though we would never say it, there was also a throwaway pile. There was a pile that, of course, they stayed in our population because we get paid by the kid, right? Of course, we're not going to just boot a kid out, but are we giving them our best effort or are we giving them what was necessary for them to be successful? And as I thought about that, it became really clear, at least in our system, that we needed to change a lot of different things. I mentioned the English language learners. The way we used to sort those kids into ability groups was to sort them by their English fluency. So think about that for a second. This is an English language learner. English is their second language. Instead of using intelligent or drive or potential, we're sorting them by their ability to speak English. They don't speak English at home. They speak English at school 5 or 6 hours a day, but that's it. And that's how we were sorting kids. It was really clear that things needed to change. And if you were to ask me now about my proudest events as my time in Hillsboro as a Hillsboro superintendent, it would be those types of changes that we made to break down a system that clearly wasn't serving everybody in an equitable way. I know the word equity it's got a lot of politics attached to it now, but I can tell you just from an educator standpoint, giving kids what they need to be successful is the right thing to do. It doesn't matter if you watch Fox News or if you watch CNN, it's still the right thing to do in order to make a difference for our kids and to open up avenues that they can't even dream of that they'd be able to pursue. Let me move to the present. So I will say the present, we'll say like 2010 till now. We are now in a spot where we view education as a team sport. I told you before in the past, we were really, hey, we got this. We'll call you if we need you. That is clearly not the case anymore. And it's not the case because we're in a place where we cannot do it on our own right now. One of the things that used to happen in Hillsboro is we would get business folks coming, and I would be at Rotary, or I'd be at the chamber meetings, or I'd be any of the animal groups, the Elks, the Lions, all of those folks. And as I was visiting those, I would have business people come up all the time and say, you need to make sure your kids are work ready. You need to make sure, and it was always this, you this and you that. And finally I got to a point where I said, you're absolutely right, they need those skills. Here's how you can help us. And we started forming all of these partnerships. We started talking about, you want kids to be ready? Give them an internship at your place. You want kids to be ready? Let's form an apprentice program with Bowley and let's get something going. You want them to be ready? Come in and talk to them about what it takes to be successful in the work environment. Come in and talk to them about their upward mobility opportunities within your own business. That led to so many partnerships in our district, where everything from advanced manufacturing, we've got kids working in clean rooms, we've got aviation, we've got a classroom out at the airport that overlooks the runway, and over again, conversations that started with, you need to do this, are now based on providing opportunities for kids that are going to put them in a track that's going to allow them to have high wage and high demand jobs. So of course, we still want them ready for college. We know that's not everybody's path. So let's make sure that at a very minimum that they're prepared for a career that they're interested in and that will sustain them and their family in a positive way. As I think back to the present here, just before the pandemic and up till now, really before the pandemic, we were cruising along. So many career and college partnerships were in place. We were diversifying our workforce in a way that just hadn't been seen before. We had a system, we have a system that kids that are interested in being educators that are bilingual. We have a partnership with Western Oregon University, and we send them off. They work for us in the summer helping with summer school. Western Oregon gives them a break on their tuition. They come back and they're bilingual educators for us. And we've been doing that for 10 years now. And we get probably 8 to 10 back a year. And if you're looking for a bilingual educator to have a pipeline that you know is coming, that for 8 to 10 a year, that's a huge number. We also instituted things that 9th grade on track. If you're not aware, the biggest predictor of someone that's going to graduate from high school or not is if they're on track with their needed credits at the end of their 9th grade year. The single biggest predictor of graduation, 9th grade on track. So we put 9th grade on track systems in place. We hired what we call graduation coaches that checks in with kids on a regular basis. They're tracking their credits. We increased dual language. We know that students where English is their second language, if we get them in a dual language program, by the time they are in 6th grade, they have not only caught up to their peers that spoke fluent English, but they're starting to surpass them. It takes a while. I mean, it takes till 6th grade for that to happen, but once they reach that, they're going up and over the top. And so we put that in place. We help students belong and feel seen and heard. For years there's been, it's really escalated recently, but there's been all kinds of conversations about the LGBTQ community and are they accepted at schools and what are we doing to make sure they're seen and heard? We've worked on that in a huge way. As I mentioned, we diversified the workforce. We continue to build a career and college pathways for them. And then March 2020 comes along. And I don't know if you remember what you were doing the day the governor was on the news and the day that she was calling all of us, but I certainly remember. The idea was that, hey, this pandemic thing, this is becoming a problem. We need to close schools for 2 weeks and then we'll be back. And so I remember having all of the we had a meeting after school, all the administrators, and I'm telling them in 2 weeks, we'll be back. And half of us were wearing masks, the other half weren't, because it was so new. And of course, a year and a half later, we finally were able to come back, and that was after a lot of political damage and a lot of community outrage, about a lot of different things. One of the things that was mentioned as a question or something you're worried about is the eroding support of the community when it comes to public education. I don't think there has been a time where that support eroded more quickly as during the pandemic. And remember that schools weren't just making this stuff up, right? We weren't just saying, yeah, we should probably close. It wasn't like that. It was conversations with the governor on a regular basis. It was conversations with Oregon Health Authority. It was, I was fortunate, I was on a group that met with the governor on a regular basis. And she would use this as a sounding board to get some feedback as to, okay, tell me the state of the community right now. If we do this, what's going to be the reaction? It was just over and over again. And it was just one of those time periods where I used to think on even a bad day, I can make 50% of the people in the community happy. We weren't close to 50% for most of COVID. As I was retired, I was cleaning out my emails, and I found an email that someone sent to me. And here's the entirety of the email. Dear Mr. Scott, just open the schools, ... You dumb shit. that was the email that was sent to me. And as I read it, I remember I actually just laughed. I think, why didn't I think of that? If I would have only thought we should just open the schools. And I think though that kind of funny little email was just an indicator of how people were feeling. It was such a polarizing event. As school district personnel, we had to get to a spot where we were not getting irritated with parents that were on one side of the issue or the other, because it was such a polarizing event. We just had to keep loving on their kids and doing what was best for them. And we just had to be happy with that. It was at that time that I remember having a conversation with our cabinet, and it was clear that we weren't going to be able to make everybody happy. And I remember giving them a pep talk about this is the time where we lead by our values and we lead as educators. We are never going to be able to out-political somebody else. That's not what we do. And we need to lean on the values that we've always used to make decisions, not by trying to make a group or this group or that other group happy. And while it didn't make the decisions any more favorable for people, it did make the decision-making easier because we had a criteria and a standard and some integrity that was being exercised as we went through that. Here's some of the things that also came up of things that you're concerned about. So mental health issues, that is, if I were to say over the years, the thing that surprised me the most, or maybe where we were caught off guard the most, is the number of mental health issues that we had after the pandemic. The kids that I'm not overselling this. The kids that came back after the pandemic were not the same kids that left prior in March 2020. They had changed, and their world had changed, and their issues had changed in a major way. And we, as a system, were not prepared for the mental health issues or for the emotional issues that were returning to the schools. And you probably heard the war story. You probably heard that. We had to do a room clear because this kid's out of control, or this kid, we can't get him to settle down, and there's an adult kind of following him around throughout the day. And those stories were all true. All of that was happening, and all of it was based on the mental health issues that our kids were experiencing following COVID. Well, one of the things that our district did that worked pretty well, it continues to be effective, is you're probably not aware, but there's a huge counselor shortage in education. And trying to find a mental health professional is an incredible challenge right now. Not just in the world of education, but just out in the world as well. And so we actually hired somebody that was coordinating mental health services for our kids. And we were partnering with mental health agencies to bring a mental health specialist into a school on a regular basis. And then we would work with the parents to get the clearance to provide the kids the okay to have those services available to them. So it was a good cutting edge solution. And still with that, by bringing outside people in, by being the facilitator, it was still a challenge to meet all of the kids' needs because they were so vast and there were just so many needs. Absences was another thing. And that's something that continues to be a problem. During COVID, families and kids started seeing school as optional. And I don't know about you, but my parents wouldn't have ever allowed me to think about school being optional. That was not a thing. It was easy to turn off your screen, right? It was easy to just not log on that day, or to log on, turn off your screen and then walk away. Really easy to do that. And that continued after COVID. Continued to a point now where I would be willing to bet that almost every district in the state of Oregon has some type of attendance program in place in order to get kids to school on a regular basis and to keep it going. The other thing that happened with our high school kids got jobs during COVID because they could do their online learning quicker than they could the in-person learning. They were getting jobs and they were helping to support their families. In Hillsboro, about 1 out of 2 of our kids is on free and reduced lunch. And their ability to help support the family during that time, they grew used to that and they were contributing in a very meaningful way, and their family started to rely on that. And so after COVID, they weren't going to school whole days. They were going to school part days, and they were working the other part, and the rest of that was going to help support the family. I can tell you as an administrator during that time, it was incredibly challenging, not just because you weren't making people happy, but because you were facing problems that you'd never encountered before. You know, if you think about whatever job you had, you probably after a year or so, it's kind of a repeat, right? It becomes cyclical, and the person who's got the issue, the name changes, but you kind of think to yourself, well, we've dealt with that before. We've never dealt with these before. It totally reminds me of, I had a friend that was elementary principal, and he was an elementary principal during the times when there was half-day kindergarten. Remember half-day kindergarten days? So he had a kid, it was the very first day of school. This kid is now a first grader. He'd been going to kindergarten half days. First day of first grade, kids are all going to the lunchroom, but he grabs his lunch bag and he heads out the front door. And the principal, my buddy, he says, "Hey, where are you going? You're in first grade now. You get to stay all day." And the kid slams his lunch pail down and he says, "Who signed me up for this shit anyway?" Can tell you, I thought that phrase many times as we dealt with the COVID issues. Many times I was thinking, who signed me up for this? As I think about the future and what we need to be thinking about, we need to be thinking about the enrollment trends that are out there across the nation, across the state of Oregon, across Washington County, Clackamas County. Enrollment is dropping. And that started during COVID. And there's a number of different reasons for it. There's more options out there now. You can go to an online charter, and those online charters have a different level of accountability than your neighborhood school does. Parents found that they could get by on one income in a lot of cases. And so there were homeschooling pods that were put together. And so that was another option. Of course, there's most schools, a lot of districts now have the online option themselves. And so you've seen enrollment drop because of the educational options that are available. Put on top of that, we're at a place where birth rates have dropped considerably over the last few years. And Leslie and Sue and I, we all have kids that are 31-ish. And if you think back to maybe when you started your family, they're late to the party if you're thinking back to where we were, right? So you've got low birth rates, you've got people waiting longer to have kids, and you've got educational option. Perfect storm for enrollment dropping in the public school system. It's projected that in 5 years, it's going to level out and it'll start back up again. But if you, like our CFO used to tell me, remember, Mike, they're not cute little kids. You have to picture them as cute little kids with backpacks. And each backpack has $10,000 in it. That's how you have to picture them. So they're not just kids to us, but they're dollars that are coming into the system. And with those dollars, you can do great things if you've got the scale to do it. So enrollment trends is something we're going to have to battle with. And in order to counteract what's currently happening, educators have to become a lot better at telling their story. Because right now they're not good at it. They're not good at telling their story. They're not good about pushing out all of the successes that are happening. They're not good about talking about the 32 career and college pathways that we have at our schools. They're not good about talking about all of the options or the early college options where you can have 2 years of college credit by the time you graduate from high school. We're not good about that. We're usually playing a lot of defense instead of putting the word out. I think in particular, we've got to have our principals be better about talking about that. When you think about the people that have the biggest influence on the perception of education, it's always the neighborhood principal. Really interesting studies done where if you were to ask a parent, tell me about the state of education, what you think about it, it would kind of get a low grade. How about your neighborhood school? Oh, it's awesome. Our neighborhood school, it's a good one. So it's those neighborhood principals that have the biggest opportunity to change that perception. The other thing that we're doing now is we're not picturing education as a place anymore. Education isn't something necessarily that has to happen in a school. It isn't a place. It's an opportunity more than anything. That could happen online. It could happen in the workforce. It could happen with an internship. It could happen with an apprenticeship. It could happen in the community in some way. So we can't think of education as a place because kids they need more stimulation now than they used to. And if you think about the way that they get feedback, it's through a device, it's through someone that they're FaceTiming with, it's instantaneous. And so our education system has to change to meet that new need. We've got to think about education as individualized in nature and not a one size fits all for everybody, because it certainly is not that anymore. We've got to think about pathways as more of the norm and not just what a few kids get who are lucky enough to know about it. And I think as we think about what's going to be required for education in the future, it's that type of thinking if we want to retain the kids and if we want to keep our families engaged in the community educational process. What hasn't changed is that we need educators that are all in. We need educators that are going to go the extra mile. And I know it's hard to think about that when you think about PPS and the strike that's going on and just some of the perception out there. But by and large, if you were to talk to individual educators, the amount of work that they do, that teachers go above and beyond, is absolutely amazing. I used to think that you had to be in the right place at the right time to make that really special difference for a kid. And now what I believe is that we oftentimes find ourselves in the right place at the right time. It's whether we're going to choose to act at that time. And that's what really matters. One of our teachers was driving home one night, and it was this time of year, so it was dark when you go to work, dark when you go home. And it was one of those rainy nights. And as she was driving, she was going over an overpass. And as she went over the overpass, she thought she saw something out of the corner of her eye. But windshield wipers going, the glare, the car coming at you, she didn't know for sure. So she kept driving. She gets about a mile on the other side of the bridge. And she can't let it go. She turns around and she comes back. She parks at the end of the bridge and she walks to the middle of the bridge, where she sees someone on the other side of the railing ready to jump. As she gets closer and closer, she didn't want to startle her. As she gets closer and closer, she calls out and she says, "Please don't jump, I can help you." The person who was on the other side of the bridge steps back over. She recognized her voice, ran and jumped into her arms. The kid was a 20-year-old that had her as a third-grade teacher. Oftentimes we're in the right place at the right time. Are you going to act when you're there? I think when it comes to the state of education right now, we've got to put ourselves in the right place. and we've got to act. We cannot have people getting on school boards that are looking to do that for some political agenda. We've got to have people that are all in because the kids need us, not because it's going to serve them well or serve whatever cause they're trying to promote. We've got to have people that dig in and understand what's happening in schools and serve as chief sense makers out in their communities. We've got to have people certainly that are going to vote and vote for candidates that are pro-education, and not just talk about pro-education, but have a track record of, because everyone's pro-education when they're running for something. But do they have a track record of making a difference? So I was so glad that Leslie asked me to and gave me the opportunity to speak here, because we're in a place where education, like I said, education is a team sport. We need everybody in the community playing for that team. Let me open it up to questions. Anything come to mind that you wanted to ask? I'm looking at the list you said. I didn't mention many of these. I was gonna pretend I didn't. We did mental health. Let's talk about book bans for a minute. There's a fun topic. In my current role, where I am coaching a superintendent, mostly superintendents and other district office folks, in Oregon, there's 197 school districts in the state of Oregon. In the last 3 years, 120 of those districts have new superintendents. 120 out of 197. And I can tell you right now that I know of 2 that are on the ropes and they won't last another month. Right? And it's become such a political job that there's all of these forces out there. Every board election, you're going to see a change in superintendents following that. So it's become incredibly political. The book ban situation, what a lot of districts are doing now, and I've been encouraging the folks I work with, before you have a challenge, let's make sure you have a good process in place for how you're going to deal with this. If you get someone that challenges a book, your first go-to action should not be to take it off the shelf. Your first action should be, let's look at our process. How do books get into the system? And what's the process if they get challenged? And make sure you're bulletproof on that process. It doesn't mean you're going to make everybody happy, but it does mean that you won't be making it up each time you get a question. There is a very deliberate national move to challenge books. I mean, that is just a very real thing, and you don't have to go far to verify that. It is a targeted effort, and there's of course a targeted effort to politicize school boards and use that as a starting point to get into politics. So my advice always is to make sure you have a process in place. I talk through the process with them just because I've heard of so many of the war stories that have been going on, and make sure they're ready to go. Oftentimes, this is the last 2 I've dealt with. It is board members that have challenged the books. Get on the board. They put their own list forward and say, hey, I hear we have 16 books in one district. And then that takes up so much of administrators' time. Once that you're taking your eye off the ball in order to deal with that stuff. We talked a little bit about the mental health. I think we've got to get super creative about how we deal with that. We've talked about a retention of the workforce. I would say retention and differentiating the workforce are 2 big issues that everybody's grappling with right now. That the program that I talked about, where we're identifying students, we refer to it as the Grow Your Own program. And we've tried a million different things. We had a pipeline to Texas for a while where we were getting a handful of educators from Texas each year, bilingual, bicultural staff members, and they were great for 3 years until they missed their family, and then they were right back home. And so having processes in place that differentiate pathways for people to become educators has been super successful. And regionally now we see that's a program that's being emulated from district to district. Let's talk about the strike thing for a second. I've never worked in Portland Public, and it is its own thing. And there's just no doubt about it. It is different than every other district in the state. And just by the size of the district and the complexity of that district, it's just a challenge. I don't think the strike situation that is occurring there, I don't think that is coincidental or an accident. If you look at the season of labor that we've had throughout the nation and the number of months that that's gone on, it is pretty entirely predictable that that's going to come to education as well. For years and years and years, districts have, if their contract expires on June 30th, they may not be done with that. They may not be done bargaining yet. So they'll continue to bargain. And now I would advise against that. I think you need to do whatever you can to try and get that wrapped up by the end of the contract, because I don't know if you're going to get the grace and the leeway to go beyond that. I think what makes it incredibly challenging is if you read the paper in the last couple of days, you've got Portland Public saying we don't have enough money from the legislators, which is true. You've got the teachers saying we need I can't remember what percentage they were at. I'm going to call it 8 or 9% at one point for 1 year. And then you've got the legislators saying we gave them historic amounts of money, highest money we've ever given them. And so I don't think it does a lot of good to start pointing fingers one way or the other. I will say the money that was received from the legislature was enough to maintain status quo. It was enough to roll up and give everybody a 3% raise like we used to. It wasn't enough to support 6, 7, 8, 9% raise that's currently being asked for and has become a trend across the nation. So that's why I think you are seeing districts in this really troublesome spot where, yep, they got historic money and the ask is bigger than it's ever been. So I think that's, and the other challenging thing, I think it's the 7 largest districts in Oregon are bargaining this spring. So there's a lot of wondering about, as Portland Public goes, does that mean that's how the rest of the state's gonna go? Maybe not 100%, but there's gonna be a lot of pressure to have that happen. If you're in a district and you start this spring to see some labor strife in your community, don't take that as a sign of teachers hate working for their district. That's really not what it is. It is a labor movement that's happening that is getting a lot of momentum. And that doesn't mean they don't like working there. It doesn't mean they don't like kids. It doesn't mean the climate culture of the district is bad. It means that movement has come to their doorstep. So keeping schools viable was one of the things that had come up, I think, by providing those various options, the pathways, the early college, just individualized education and having a million different pathways for people. We built, last year we opened a Pathways Center, and the entire concept behind it was that if someone is not being successful in their comprehensive high school, if they can't find their niche or they're just not being successful there, let's have them to the Pathways Center and let's put a plan together that they can be successful on. And I think you're going to see more and more of that throughout education. Obviously, there's a sweet spot there. You can't have an individualized program for everybody and then not have the teachers to do it. So, but what you will see is there'll become a pattern of programs that are going to work for kids that currently don't exist, and we'll be able to start filling those needs. All right, any questions come up? I've talked for a long time. Yeah.
I'm assuming that you didn't, you meaning Hillsboro District didn't create pathways from just an idea and then make it happen. You took a model from somewhere, was successful, and you knew it worked, adapted it to your own. Is this something that is being pushed out to other districts? Please consider this. You know, these are the successes, these are the challenges, rather than just let other districts hope they find something that works.
I think 2 things are happening. We get a lot of people visiting in order to see what that program is, and it's taken 10 years to get it where it is. But there are some early steps that you can take to get a little bit of traction. And the other thing that happens is the Oregon Department of Education, when they're asked about pathways, they send them our way or they send them to Salem Kaiser. And so we're kind of the 2 districts that are doing that pretty well. And the state understands that. It's really about allocating and prioritizing resources in order to fund that. And that means you're going to have to take it away from some other things. When I said that our electives now are focused around high wage, high demand jobs, we wouldn't start a new elective now or a new class, if it didn't somehow help kids get to that. Of course, we're gonna have music and we're gonna have band. I mean, we're gonna always have that stuff, but when it comes to a new program, it's gotta be something that's going to serve their long time being very well. Yeah.
What do you think about cell phones in school?
Look at the time. Do you want to share your opinion first? I think you've got one.
Not actually, I see both sides.
Yeah.
As far as kids needing to be able to contact and have access to communication between classes.
Right.
But, you know, the word is that they're on their phones quite a bit.
Yep. I think the trend you're going to see coming is that those phones are locked up as they walk into a class. I think you're going to see more and more of that. And what's that?
Like at concerts.
Yeah, exactly. Like in the bag that you.
Shows and
Yep, exactly.
want the-
Right.
Take it out.
One of the things that I believe is prohibiting that from happening more quickly is the cost of that security system to do that. I mean, if you think about how many classrooms you're in a high school, I mean, it used to be, we were talking about this at the table, it used to be, you would, as kids came in, you would throw them all in a basket. And that was the extent of the security system. And then, you know, about halfway through, the basket would be jumping because they're all vibrating. But, yeah. But I think we're going to see more and more of that. And like Hillsboro in their middle schools last year, no phones. Yeah, hasn't happened at the high school yet. And but I won't be surprised. I think it's coming. And you hear of some districts that have already done it. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I can think, I was just gonna say, I have a 17-year-old that is vehemently dealing with the phone issue.
Yeah.
Because he insists that it's a tool that he uses in school. He has some teachers that allow that and some teachers that are very strict, and we've gotten multiple emails about his phone use.
Yeah.
And I side on him being a responsible semi-adult, but
Yeah.
you know, he doesn't yet know when it's okay to use his phone and when it's not, so.
Yeah, I think it will take the entire district being consistent on it, and it can't be, yeah, I don't want to take off the kid, I want to be everyone's favorite teacher, so you guys can have your phone. It can't be that thing. And before the pandemic, we relied on kids with phones because we didn't have enough computers to go with. And so we were welcoming that. We were saying, yeah, bring your phone, because then you won't have to share a computer with this kid. Now, during the pandemic, of course, one of the first things that we did is we took every laptop in our district and we dismantled any laptop available, and it went out to every kid in the district. And now it's become you get a Chromebook for $300. It's cheaper than carrying 4 or 5 textbooks around. So now that is not a barrier like it used to be, but they have to be consistent or it's never gonna work. Yeah. Yeah.
My son teaches high school in Junction City, and they introduced a ban on cell phones. They haven't taken them away from the kids. But the teachers have come up with a system where they allow the kids to use them as they're going between classes.
Yeah.
But they have to put them in a secure place when they come into the classroom, and they can pick them up when they leave.
Yeah.
And my son tells me that bathroom breaks have gone down to 2 minutes.
Because they can't take their phone with them.
Because they can't take their phone.
Right.
And that their attention span for Spanish is increased appreciably.
I would think so. I love it. I think that's I do think that's the trend that's coming. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
How does the gun violence impact the school system, and how did you see that in the school system?
Yeah, so when I was a building administrator, I think I saw 3 guns my entire time. And the one that I remember taking from a kid was actually a BB gun. It was super rare. And that was just a few years back. And now you hear about it all the time. There was just a situation in Hillsboro 2 weeks ago where a student was shot and killed at a house party, and it was a high school kid, and the two suspects are also high school kids. If you were to talk to our students, the access that they have to guns it's not hard to give them. So it is a constant worry at schools. We were talking about the social media thing at the table, and the number of times that in any given year that a high school principal has a social media threat, and here's one that happens all the time. It'll be either a picture of a kid, or it might just be on a table of a gun, and it'll say Century High School, don't come to school Friday. It'll be something like that. And so if you're an administrator at Century High School, what do you do with that? Usually talk to a handful of kids and you can trace it back fairly quick. That's one thing we have going for us is kids love to talk. That's a good thing. And they become more sensitive to the potential for violence. So they oftentimes are the ones that come forward and include the adults into it. A lot of the administrators, they monitor social media in a really big way. It is the biggest use of administrators' time when it comes to behaviors is tracking down social media threats or social media bullying of some type. So it is constant. Now, do we see a ton of guns at school? No. But do we hear about them? Yeah. And then that's where all the time is spent is tracking it down and making sure that that's not a true thing. So it happens all the time. Yeah.
Do you, let's follow up on that. Do you do the drills?
Yeah. Yes.
And how do you start and how often?
Oh, it's all the time. It's very sad. We've done, just in the last 10 years, we've done 2 full-scale active shooter drills with our law enforcement partners. So like after school, we'll notify all the neighbors because if you don't notify them, you're gonna cause a lot of excitement in that neighborhood. And they'll act like there's an active shooter in the building. Like they have access to all of our school maps. They'll bring it up on their car computer. They can see all the hallways and everything. We've got a really strong partnership with law enforcement. So we practice those all the time with our law enforcement partners, and we practice them with our students. The number of times we do lockdown or lock-in drills, we don't do them, I would say at a minimum, once a quarter, I believe is what we're requiring for them right now. So every 9 weeks, yeah.
We had one today and I'm just subbing in elementary, so it's in elementary too. And then students know and teachers know. And so
Talk about the manner in which a teacher deals with that. Like what's their tone and what's their.
when in a lockdown.
Yeah.
Well, it's just of course, the teacher maintains the calm, security for the students. And then when you're taking them through a drill, we're very transparent, so the students know it is a drill. But students then go with their teacher to a space in the classroom where it's not visible from the hallway, and then all blinds are drawn. And then what we did today is then, because it's a drill, then we go through those hallways and we gently, to not frighten the children, see if the door is locked. And then we come back together and report, if there's anything where we have missed something that's going on. But the students, I think, it's just like, I don't know, it was spring break, we had an earthquake, I remember, I don't know how many years back. And we were going through hundreds of earthquake drills. And all of a sudden we're in an earthquake. I didn't even know what it was at first. And the kids immediately, like that, all of us right there. And so lockdown drills have become that kind of routine for our students, and the teachers know exactly how to respond and react. And their goal obviously is to keep the students in and out of sight. So yeah.
It's become such a real part of what the administrators do and tend to. I can tell we have administrative meetings once a month, 2 times a year during our administrative meetings. So we've got about 70 administrators all together. And we do these tabletop activities. So we'll put them in groups And we'll drop a scenario on the table and say, here's what's just happened. You've just got word that a student on a bike is coming towards your school, looks like they might have a gun. What do you do? And so they talk and then they put a plan into place. And then we drop another scenario with updated information. And it looks like there's something in the backpack now walking towards the school, being parked and walking toward the school. And so we do these activities so they literally have to think through what they're going to do so that it becomes second nature. We actually, as a cabinet, as the executive administrators in the district, we actually have a poster-sized chart on our wall. And it says, if there's a crisis, here's what you do. Here's our reaction in the first 10 minutes, the next 30 minutes, and the next 90 minutes. And it allows us to think, like, if there's an active shooter and it's near the end of the day release, you don't want buses rolling up there, right? You want them to be out circling somewhere. So it's those types of things that you want to think through, and it just becomes second nature, that it's something that everybody does.
No wonder they want to race.
Yeah, no, yeah, true. No wonder they want to
I
race.
mean, that's
Yeah.
hazardous duty stuff.
Right. No, it's a different place than when most of them start.
Yeah.
Yeah. We cannot end on the gun thing. This talk cannot end on that. So I want to tell you one little story. And, this is better than ending on tabletops and active shooters. So I was doing classroom visits one time, and I was in a kindergarten classroom. There was 10 minutes left in the day. I had no idea, but if you haven't been in a kindergarten class, the 100th day of school is a big deal. Like, I had known 6th grade was the lowest I ever taught, and then I went to middle school and changed my life forever. But so I happened to be there on the 100th day of school. And I sit down at a table, and there's these two kids, there's this little guy and this little girl, and there's collections of hundreds everywhere. So there's 100 jelly beans in that bar, and they're in that jar, and there's 100 popsicle sticks, and there's 100 tennis balls over there, and there's, just hundreds being celebrated. And this is the 100th day of learning that they're celebrating. They had 10 strips. Each strip had 10 stars on. They were coloring these strips, staple them together, and they're going to wear a crown of 100 stars. 10 minutes left in the day. Then I start talking to this kid, and I say, tell me, what's your favorite thing about kindergarten? And I ask him like 3 questions. He finally interrupts me. He says, hey, if you're going to sit here and ask me questions, would you help me color? And I said, absolutely. And so he passes, and he's one of these kids that he's not staying in line, right? I mean, that would be time intensive. So he gives me a broken crayon with all the paper chipped off, and we're coloring. And within 10 minutes, we're done. We staple this thing together. He puts a crown on his head. He goes start to pack his backpack. And this little girl over here, she is doing the fancy coloring, where you outline it in the heavy mark and then you color it in with a lighter. And I still have the crayon in my hand, and her strip's of paper in the middle. And so I grab a strip and I start to pull it towards me. She goes, she pulls it back. Don't touch my stuff. That's what she said. I was so intimidated that I changed groups and helped another kid. I was not going to do that. So anyway, now she's running something. Yes, absolutely. So we are creating very assertive and in control kids. I can tell you that. All right, pleasure to be here tonight. Thanks for having me.